Welcome, everybody, to the Long Game podcast with your hosts, myself, Ben Scallon, and my esteemed colleague, Jason Osborne. Jason, I was going to tell you that we have the very exciting news that we have a sponsor on this podcast, and that sponsor is ourselves. It's kind of like that meme where Barack Obama is giving himself a medal. We've got one of those situations going on because
It's a bit anticlimactic for me to hear that our big sponsor is ourselves. But anyway,
yeah, I'm just surprised that we were willing to go into business with ourselves, honestly, because we have Gript merchandise, which you can purchase if you're a fan of this show or you know somebody who's a fan of this show. You can go to gript.ie/merch. The link is on screen for those of you who are viewing, and you can buy hats, t-shirts, mugs, whatever you want. Actually, I don't think we have hats. I think I'm lying to you. So misinformation strikes again. That was a bad idea. But anyway, you can see on screen we've got a wide range of options for you if you or somebody you know.
Get yourself a thermonuclear weapon while you're there. You've got it all.
The thing is, once they've clicked into it to get their thermonuclear weapon, they'll realize it's not there, but they might see something they do like, like a hoodie or something. So that is an option for those of you who might be interested in such things. So while we're speaking of, that was a disastrous opening to the podcast, I feel.
It was.
But while we're speaking of disasters of biblical proportions, we might talk about the ongoing Storm Owen over the last week that has been ravaging the country, and we clearly have massive infrastructure damage to hundreds of thousands of homes across the country that is yet to be repaired. Some people will not have their home and their electricity and water restored until the 5th of February. So rather absurd timeline to be living in effectively the Stone Age, it seems, in a first world country. What do you think, Jason, of people in Ireland paying first world taxes for what feels like third world services when it comes to things like this?
Sounds par for the course to me, but I will just draw attention to the fact that I think you're going to get absolutely butchered for your pronunciation. What did you say? Storm Éowyn.
I've never, you see, it's been a while since I watched Lord of the Rings, so I probably fumbled that.
That character's just...
Go ahead.
Own in your head as far as you're concerned.
Honestly, I've read so much about the storm. I've read every article, that I was researching in preparation for this, and I've never heard it said out loud. So anyway, I can't stop taking L's this morning, it seems. But
that was a great friend move of me to draw attention to it straight away. But no, where do you even begin with this bloody debacle? I mean, we're 5 days out. Am I right? Not 5 days out from the storm, pretty much, and you've still got people sitting in the cold and the dark, without electricity, without access to water, still unable to heat their homes. Obviously, some people not even able to leave their homes because trees still haven't been cleared from the main road outside their houses. There's downed power lines still. I was listening this morning to an interview with an elderly, well, not that elderly, lest they listen in, a Mayo couple who said the past couple of days they had literally been surviving on bread and water because they weren't able to get out of their home and that it was cold, all of these different things. But this is the reality for literally thousands of people across the country. And as you say, paying first world taxes were commonly regarded. I mean, I get it speaking to friends of different nationalities and things who comment on Ireland's wealth, because the headlines were very prominent last year about our budgetary surplus and the money we got from the Apple taxes. The fact that we're known for our wealth, whether rightly or wrongly, and this is the state of the infrastructure. I remember reading last year about the state of South Africa's infrastructure, where they have rolling blackouts in order to ensure their grid doesn't go down. I mean, we don't have implemented rolling blackouts, but we may as well, given that it seems to go down every couple of weeks, every time a storm or a cold snap comes around. And just, I think, I don't doubt you feel the same way, but this isn't to cast, doubts on the work done by any of the emergency services or any of the people who were out in the horrendous weather tidying it up. But there are serious questions to be answered here, and it really can't be the case that this is another one that's let slide.
Yeah, what do you think of Dara O'Brien saying that we shouldn't politicize the aftermath of a storm like this? I.e., don't politicize the government's lack of ability to prepare and think, more than 5 minutes in advance of the kinds of calamities that might befall the country. Because as you know, and as I know, and as all our viewers know, this is the same government that for decades now has been banging the climate alarmism drum, where they tell us that storms like this are going to become normal and commonplace. These are not only inevitable, and I mean, of course, climate change or no climate change, we all know that massive storms have happened in Ireland in the past, all throughout the 20th century. It's not that common, but it has happened in the past, so this isn't exactly unprecedented. But putting all that aside, they're the ones who tell us that stuff like this is going to start happening every 45 minutes and that we are imminently facing into the monsoon normality that many countries around the world have already been dealing with for years. And yet apparently we didn't think to perhaps do some sort of basic hardening of our infrastructure to make sure that power lines are preserved and that they aren't just going to be ripped out of their sockets the second a strong gust comes over the country. I'm not sure why you wouldn't think ahead and plan for those sorts of basic eventualities if you believe what you say you believe, which is that we're a bit about to be shafted by this stuff constantly.
And I mean, I have seen people pointing to the fact that obviously there's extensive repair work has to take place in, for example, Florida or various US states whenever a big hurricane hits. But it is also the case that, as I understand it, Owen was about a category 1 so far as the hurricane scale goes. Whereas, the storms hitting the US are frequently, say, category 3, 4, 5, things like this. So it's not outside of the realms of possibility that an island on the edge of the Atlantic is frequently going to be having to put up with powerful storms. And as I say, I was only chatting to my parents about this the other day. I don't remember a decade ago. I'm sure there's some infrastructure buff who'll be able to tell me why this is, but I haven't come across the answer yet. I don't remember a decade ago the power going out every couple of weeks and taking hours to be restored, whereas it really is every couple of weeks now. I can't get over this. And as you say, Dara O'Brien was very quick to say yesterday, as the new Minister for Climate and Energy and these relevant fields, that we shouldn't be rushing to politicize. And I think he was saying this in response to calls that the Dáil should return, obviously, because they're off on their holidays at the moment. And it's so par for the course. I mean, it's exactly like in the wake of COVID when they were saying, let's not point fingers, let's figure out how we can have a constructive approach to this so that we can deal with the next pandemic better. And it's like, sometimes figuring out how to operate more effectively in the future is figuring out what you did wrong and who's responsible for doing wrong and getting them out of there so that you can get effective people in. There's just no appetite for that here because, as I'm sure we'll get into later in the episode, it's like bloody musical chairs amongst the ministers and things. And obviously no one wants to be pointing the finger at anyone else because it sort of incriminates all of them because they've all held the same offices in the past.
Yeah, I mean, if you think particularly about the policies that have underlined some of the more extensive damage that we've seen over the past week. And one example, we all know that Eamon Ryan, now that he's out of office, he's had the country on the Green Mile for the last 5 years at least. For those who, I'm sure most people are familiar with the Green Mile, but it's 25 years old now, so there might be some younger viewers who aren't familiar with it. This film about a lot of prison inmates, and many of them are on death row, and there's a corridor that you have to go down to go to the place of execution, and it's got a green carpet, and because it's this long, ominous journey, it's referred to as the Green Mile. That's effectively what green policies have had this country on for the last half a decade or more. And that was exemplified, I think, by the fact that when I went down to Galway just yesterday to report on this, I was speaking to businessman Declan Ganley, who was there, and I did an interview with him, which some of you might have seen. And he was talking about how so many homes around his area, he's not in this position because he prepared ahead of time. He has a generator and things, but many people have these newer homes that don't have access to, say, an open fireplace where you can burn turf and peat and all of this stuff that would have been normal 100 years ago in
for
these parts of the country.
Yeah.
Exactly, that this would have been what you did as a backup plan, even after the electrification of the country. At least we can fall back on that if things go wrong. As we know now, notoriously, that's all being done away with. And they've said, don't worry, just rely entirely on electricity. What do you do when the electricity goes out because of something like this? You do absolutely nothing. You sit there shivering and you're not even able to flush the toilet. That's what you do. So the idea that we would not have had the forethought to come up with a backup plan for what if our insane climate mania doesn't work out, which, shocker, it seems not to have worked out, it's the height of incompetence and short-sightedness. So it makes sense why ministers would want to let's not get into the finger pointing business here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put on the green jersey and celebrate what we've done well to this point. Put on many green jerseys. If you're cold, it'll keep you warm. But I do think that it's exactly this. It's like, as you say, even if you buy fully into the green agenda and a lot of the effort that's been underway in Ireland over the past decade or so, there's no excuse for not being prepared for things like this. I mean, as you say, they have been the people saying that things like this are going to be becoming more and more frequent. And we just really, you cannot say that we're in a prepared state. I mean, I was reading again the news about it this morning. Still hundreds of thousands of people without power and water. They're setting up more and more of these emergency hubs, which is like something, as all respect to people in the third world, it's like something out of the third world. You've got people flocking all over the country to these hubs where they can get some warmth, get some electricity, get some food and bloody water. And you've just got how is it they put it? International crews coming from countries around Europe to come and help out. And it's like, it just doesn't appear like a slickly oiled operation to me so much as it does desperate scrambling to cover over the mess we've made of our own infrastructure, and all in pursuit of these policies that have been eminently questionable the entire way along. So it's extremely frustrating. And I would be of the opinion, I'm obviously not in politics, but I'm of the opinion that the Dáil should be bloody back now. Never mind, 5-6 days. Cabinet's meeting tomorrow, like days after people have been sitting in the cold and the dark. This is going out on Tuesday. Cabinet's due to meet tomorrow. The ministers will all be sure to tell you they've been working very hard in the meantime. Darragh O'Brien even said yesterday, what was it he said? I have the quote here. That no speech in Dáil Éireann is going to restore power or water or assist a community. It's like, I mean, talk about writing yourself into obsolescence. What are you guys there for if you're not able to make an effective difference with all the power in the country at your fingertips?
I mean, there is an element of truth to the argument that, well, look, there's very little we can do other than clean up the damage. That is true to an extent. But that's why a lot of the work that needs to be done should have been done years ago. This is the kind of thing that it's no good when a burglar breaks in to think, oh man, I really should have bought that gun. Yeah, you should have, and you don't, so now you're dead. Like that's the way we need to think about these things. And it seems like we're instead tinkering around the edges with Inspector Gadget, harebrained solutions like, what if we put a cork up this cow's backside to try and stop it from farting? Maybe we can reduce the carbon emissions of the world by 1/1,000,000%.
It is. It's like the masterminders in the ESB who have limited resources to work with are currently stood around a table looking at a piece of chewing gum, a paper clip, and I don't know, a hairbrush or something like this. And they're like, right, how do we get the grid back online?
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't exactly inspire confidence that this is the priority. And we talked about it on a previous podcast, but I think it's worth reiterating that if I was to be convinced of their worldview today that we're facing an immediate climate emergency, I mean, look, Trump has pulled out of all of these climate deals. China never took them seriously to begin with, nor did India. So you've got the three biggest polluting countries in the world that are saying, we're not going along with this stuff anymore. So even if you want to say, well, we should still do our part or we should make some kind of contribution, okay, whatever, let's fine, go along with that. But have a backup plan. Think what will happen if massive storms start becoming a regular occurrence that they happen 2 to 3 times a year. What will happen if Dunleary is submerged in water. Like, what are we going to do? I'm not convinced they have any plan for those sorts of eventualities that they tell us are about to happen any day now. And it's just, it shows a lack of seriousness, I think, in the way we decide policy.
Yeah, and I mean, I obviously would see that the roots of this issue as being not so much in obviously the workers on the ground, as we've said, but in the political choices we've made. To segue to one of the next topics we want to talk about, what do you make of the government appointments? Because these obviously took place last Thursday after less than edifying scenes in the Dáil on the Wednesday. The Taoiseach's appointment was delayed, so was the appointment of all the cabinet members. Anyway, we're there now. We've got our new ministers. What do you make of them?
This is going to almost give the listeners whiplash, I think, just because I went from castigating the government for incompetence and now it sounds like I'm complimenting them. But I will say that overall, by the standards of the current people who we have in elected office, it's actually decent, I would say, compared to what we had prior. It seems like there's a more serious caliber of person in most of the important positions. You know, obviously we can all identify ways in which we would individually like things to be improved. No, you know, it's not the government that you or I would pick, no doubt. But
no.
I think I'm looking at the list of James Brown for housing. James Brown is a fairly serious guy, I would say, as far as the standard of politician we have goes. We have Peter Burke in Enterprise, same deal. I mean, he's questioned the wisdom of NGOs and the fact that we don't have a lot of these groups representing the groups who they claim to represent. So he's been vocal about that. That's not bad. Jim O'Callaghan in Justice. Again, say what you will about Jim. I think he'll do a better job than McEntee. That's my personal opinion.
It's not a particularly high bar.
It's not a high bar, but you know, I think it's notable. Pascal in finance. I mean, say what you will about Pascal. He's good at finance for the most part. He kind of knows what he's doing there. So, we could obviously get to some of the less exciting outcomes from this whole exercise. But I do think that overall, it looks like there's a slightly different caliber of person who have stepped into the really important portfolios that you want to get right. So that's a bit encouraging, I suppose. What about you? What did you think?
I think you're exceedingly generous in your characterization of the shape of the new government, which certainly isn't a bad thing. I do think that you should be charitable in terms of as much as you can in terms of your willing people to do a good job once they get in there. But I'm not optimistic. I mean, to take the example of just one example, James Brown moving into housing, taking over from Dara O'Brien, who, as we mentioned a moment ago, is moving over to energy and climate and all of this. I was listening to James Brown on the radio this morning. He was on RTE Radio 1 speaking about the cleanup operation in the wake of the storm before he was talking about housing. And I was just thoroughly unconvinced. He was using talking points that it feels to me that if you're on social media and things, people moved past like weeks ago. Like he was talking about how we're going to continue ramping up the supply of housing. And I can't remember which presenter it was, but they interjected and said, but the supply fell last year. It's like it didn't fall by a massive number, but it fell anyway. And he was talking about, oh yeah, but we had all these new houses started. And he was again interjected with, yeah, but builders are being incentivized to, say they're going to be starting new homes. And he's like, oh, well, we'll probably see this all added into this year's figure. And it's like, well, we've been given that promise before, so I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for a surge in houses now in 2025. I'd be delighted to be proven wrong, but he to me, he did not inspire confidence in the slightest. I mean, maybe he is one of these people who's going to squirrel away quietly in the dark and pull up a great result, but I don't think so. And then the one that I think is on many people's lips, McEntee moving from justice to education. It's like, I don't see it.
What can one say about such things? I mean,
she did such a great job in justice. They were like, all right, onto the school system with you.
I've heard this is a joke, right? So, and it's not even my joke; it's a joke I heard from somebody else. So I'm not saying that this is true, but I saw a tweet where somebody was saying that McEntee must have some kind of like embarrassing photograph of Simon Harris at the Christmas party or something like that, because of the fact that she just keeps going up and up and up. I mean, she's now deputy leader of Fine Gael. then she's steps into probably one of the most important ministerial positions we have. The education department is, I believe, the third biggest department by its budget. So that's a step up from justice for her as far as the amount of responsibility that she'll command. It's really
I do feel
inexplicable.
I do feel like she's on the Simon Harris arc, which is that, people who might have been critical of Simon Harris in the past, like you and I, watched with horror as he kept falling upward. And it's kind of like watching her do the same thing, where we're very critical of a lot of the decisions she's made, and certainly the state she's leaving justice in. And yet we continue to watch her ascend. Again, she's just another one. The way when we were saying that we're going to be discussing this topic, I was thinking about the fact that it reeks of moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. It's a lot of the same old faces who not only didn't do great, but a lot of people say did horrendously in their last portfolios. The only plus some people are going to take, if we're going to continue with the Titanic analogy, is a poor old Roderick got knocked overboard, and he's no longer in charge of equality and integration. But I'm not optimistic. As we were discussing last week, I do think there's some cause for optimism in terms of the general vision of this government, which is that it doesn't have the sort of green ideological element in there, and the independents that they are partnering with seem more sensible. But obviously, the same characters are in the driver's seats, and Simon Harris going to the Department for Foreign Affairs. I mean, that seems like a funny choice given his, couple of months long feud with Trump now, who's obviously one of our most important trading partners and leader of the country with the biggest investments in us. So
did you see the way Trump just manhandled Colombia? God forbid if he decided to roll up his sleeves and get to work on us. God only knows the kinds of terror that man could inflict on the political leaders of this country if he felt sufficiently motivated to do so.
I know, and less people do accuse us of, willing on the country's downfall. We are on Ireland's side. I certainly don't think we should kowtow to Trump's every demand. I don't think, but I do think he's doing what's in his country's best interests. It's time for us to do in ours. And I saw this morning a headline that apparently they're going to put on a strong diplomatic show in Washington come St. Patrick's Day. They're going to be sending over apparently a couple of senior ministers. I have to read more about it after. But if that's the case, I would say, that's good. Suck up your pride, send over a bunch of people over there, ensure that we keep a strong presence in Washington because we're going to need it over the next couple of years.
On the cabinet appointments as well, I just wanted to ask, what did you think of the fact that James Brown goes into housing and then Jennifer Carroll McNeil goes into health? And both of those have never held a senior cabinet position before. They were junior ministers. But imagine your first senior cabinet position being housing and or health. The most cursed of cursed chalices that is designed to destroy the person who takes it up. Because you think about how even if you're extremely competent, those are such difficult things to get right. I mean, imagine inheriting the mess that is the Irish healthcare system or the Irish housing market. That's a nightmare for anybody. And so if you've never held a senior position before, stepping into that, they're going to need all the help they can get, I'd say. Divine and otherwise.
I do think there's something to be said. My wife is Polish, and she was thoroughly bemused initially a couple of years ago by the fact that no expertise is necessarily required in any of the areas that you're given sort of ministership over. Again, to refer back to the US, because it's been so in the public eye over the past couple of weeks, you do have people, say you've got a business magnate put into the Department of Commerce, you've got a military veteran put into the Department of Defense. Whatever you think about these, their views or their takes on things, they have experience in these areas, whereas people are just, hop, skipping and jumping from one portfolio, like just in Helen McEntee's case, justice to education. In Darragh O'Brien's case, okay, there's some overlap, say, between housing and planning and things to climate and energy, but there's still a pretty severe difference in focus there. Similarly with, say, our new health minister, is she equipped for that? I would guess probably not, but it's the way we have things structured, and that's what we're going to have to deal with.
Well, before we move on to our next topic, I might just throw out there as a piece of information which may or may not be of interest to people. I was speaking to a very senior figure within the government over the last few days, and basically they were telling me that the whole. I should preface this by saying I was asking, are we going to see any more kind of social referendums over the next few years? Because obviously that's been something that we've seen over the last decade, is constant attempts to update the constitution and change it in various different ways, just turning it into confetti basically, where any kind of whim politicians have, we suddenly have to take a crack at the constitution. I asked, are we going to see more of that? And this very senior government figure was telling me basically no, and that they're done with that because they've realized, first of all, they got so comprehensively smacked with the family and care referendums last year that they don't want a repeat of that. It just left a bad cloud hanging over them, and so they don't want to risk it. And so this person was telling me that the only real referendum they might consider is one to set up a kind of an EU patent court that's been in the works for a while, and we can get into. Yeah, it's that basically it. They're saying it's so boring that people might just sort of let it go through out of apathy, and they think that there's merit to it. And it's not the most outrageous thing in the world. I'd personally be against it, and we can get into that maybe at a later episode if and when that comes onto the agenda. But yeah, as far as social changes and trying to enshrine polyamory in the constitution or something, that's not going to be a thing, was what this individual was telling me, and they'd be in a position where they would know. So I think that's interesting as far as the forecast for the next 5 years.
Yeah, well, if they are able to withstand the pressure from the usual suspects to put on a popular referendum, like the stupid one that keeps coming up on a constitutional right to housing. Like, to what housing? It's like, where are the houses everyone's going to have a right to? But if they're able to resist that pressure compared to, previous governments, you got to take the wins where you can get them. You got to work with what you have, and we don't have a great hand, but you just got to. It's as you say. It's a change from the last government, and that's to be welcomed.
Well, speaking of things that are changing in the country, I published an article just yesterday about how an offshoot of ISIS, the Islamist terrorist group, has apparently threatened to target St. Patrick's Day events in Ireland this year, in addition to a number of other events. And so for those of you who may not have seen the article, effectively, Islamic State Khorasan, or ISK, it sounds kind of like a planet from Star Wars, but it's a region.
It sounds like a K-pop group or something.
Kind of, yeah. But ISK, they're a sub-branch of ISIS, so it's effectively a ISIS-adjacent Islamist group, but they operate mainly in kind of Central Asia. That's their stomping ground. And they've committed serious terrorist attacks within the last decade. I don't know if people remember that Moscow concert hall that got shut up and like 80 people died or something, and it was this big massacre. That was them. So they're a serious, currently active terrorist group. And according to German media on some of their propaganda channels, this terrorist organization released a list of cultural events across Europe and North America that they want to be attacked, including Oktoberfest things in Germany and the Cannes Film Festival in France, and most pertinently for us, St. Patrick's Day events in Ireland. And it was sort of a call to action where they were saying, hey, if you're an Islamist head case and you happen to be in the Netherlands while they're doing something that's of cultural significance to them, feel free to throw a few grenades and we won't stop you, basically.
Yeah.
So this is obviously concerning. I mean, needless to say, that should go without saying. But I asked Interpol, Europol, and the Gardaí for a comment on it because Bild, which is the biggest newspaper in Europe, had reported on this, and seemingly nobody else had. It hadn't gotten widespread traction in the media, which I found a bit confusing. So I asked all the relevant authorities what they made of it. Europol didn't get back to me at all. Interpol got back to me to say you should ask the Gardaí, which I had already done, so that wasn't much help. And then I asked the Gardaí, and they said, we don't comment on unverified third-party material. And I said, yeah, that's the point of the email, genius. I'm asking you, is this something you're aware of? Have you verified it? Like, you know, what should we make of this as the public? And they just ignored me. So not terribly helpful or encouraging. What do you think, Jason? Will you be going to the St. Patrick's Day parade this year?
Well, I wouldn't be anyway, because I just think town is an absolute mess on St. Patrick's Day, and you're bloody like sardines in a tin going in on the Lewis. But this certainly would not put you at ease, given that, as I reported on a couple of weeks ago, the Europol report on terrorism and terrorism-related offences, the most recent one that we have, which details sort of statistics relating to 2023, show that jihadist terrorism in Europe is sort of soaring in terms of arrests, and that included a doubling in Ireland. Now, that obviously doesn't mean a bunch of violent incidents necessarily, but it can include things like, you know, funding of Islamic terrorism and whatnot. But that said, if you're going to be funding Islamic terrorism, you're probably fairly questionable in your sentiments at the very least. So suffice to say, there's a lot of sympathisers, it seems, based on the evidence around Ireland. And I mean, you included in that article, which I read with interest, that, you know, I don't know if people remember back in 2017, a London bridge attack which killed 8 people and injured nearly 50 of them. One of the London bridge attackers had lived in the Dublin suburb of Rathmines, which isn't too far from yourself or myself for much of the time we've been living in Dublin. I just get this sense with Islamic terrorism that it's like, whether rightly or wrongly, there's a bit of a rug pulled over it. But then we also had this case over in Galway, where the army chaplain was stabbed, and there was an alleged element of Islamic radicalization involved in that. And then that thread just seemed to drop off the face of the earth altogether. So it's whether there's something unusual at play in all of this, who knows? But it's also the case that there's not a lot of reason for confidence when it comes to being able to say with certainty that this isn't present in Ireland, and it isn't something we should be worried about, because the reality is we just don't have a whole load of details about the extent of Islamic radicalization in Ireland. And when you do ask for them, as you've done, say, in this specific instance with this threat to St. Patrick's Day, they don't seem too forthcoming with offering comment or any thoughts about it. So I've thought for a long time that Ireland could unfortunately potentially be a soft target. I mean, I don't see how it couldn't be. We're hemorrhaging Gardaí numbers. We've got a lot of packed thoroughfares, particularly in Dublin, that in similar cities in Europe, things have been carried out. So obviously we pray for the continued security of our nation, but it is concerning that of the few events they would put up as being of particular interest to potential attackers, St. Patrick's Day is listed among them.
Yeah, and there's something deviously genius about it in its evil, because it's such a low-cost way to ruin an event where it doesn't take any effort to just put out a threat and say, by the way, we're thinking of attacking this thing. And that way they don't even have to actually do it. Like, I seriously doubt they're going to attack all 10 events that they've listed there, particularly since they've telegraphed it in advance. I mean, I'd be surprised if they carried out any of those attacks, frankly, because the security is clearly going to be heightened if people have their heads screwed on right. But just by saying it, like yourself, I wouldn't attend the St. Patrick's Day parade in recent years. But if I had thought of going to it, I'd definitely not bring my family to something like that now. So it just puts a kind of a dark blanket over the whole thing and makes you think, maybe I should not take the risk. So yeah, it's obviously despicable, but I think when the Gardaí in 2018 decided to cover the route of the parade with emergency services vehicles like fire trucks and so on, just to prevent, God forbid, some kind of Nice-style truck attack where people just drive through crowds, which is terrible because there's no real way to easily stop that, and it's so cheap and it's hard to track. Like, if a guy's trying to buy explosives on the dark web, you can track him down pretty easily, and you know there's a way to intercept that. Or people who are illegally purchasing guns, there's all sorts of mechanisms law enforcement can
unless it's the UK where the systems break down entirely and you have the most questionable search history in the world, as your man who carried out the Southport attack seemed to, and you just managed to slip through all of the cracks like a hair through a bloody pinhead.
Well, yeah, indeed. I mean, there are less than robust systems in place, depending on what country you're in. But I'd say if you're dealing with a competent law enforcement agency, obviously they're going to be able to stop people from buying specialized weaponry. But if some guy rents a truck, there's nothing suspicious about that necessarily. Why, that's not going to set off any alarm bells. And so, again, that's why it's so difficult to stop this stuff, because it's so easy from the perspective of the perpetrator.
And I think, to be fair to our law enforcement, we haven't seen any of the mass style attacks that we have seen elsewhere in Europe. And I don't doubt that's for... I can imagine there's probably those who would have liked to see those things take place in Ireland. So it is probably to their credit that these things haven't taken place. But I think we're living in an age where increased vigilance is required. And to the observer like you, I, or anyone else in the country, there's not too many signs that increased vigilance is even capable of taking place, given that Garda numbers are falling and they're stretched so thin and all of this. So again, we live in hope, but certainly a worrying sign.
Yeah, and also I would say that, all things considered, I doubt an attack will take place, only because it's as I alluded to earlier, it's one of those things where if they were able to carry out an attack, they would just do it. You're not going to tell people in advance, by the way, I'm planning to blow up so and so like that.
So it's like your man in Father Ted, Pat Mustard. He's standing in the phone box and calling ahead and things like this. And it's,
yeah, not exactly the best strategy if you're actually planning to carry out an atrocity. So what I assume this is just an impotent call for someone somewhere to do something if they feel so inclined, as opposed to saying we actually have a system in place and we're going to approach it this way. So that's, I suppose, a little bit encouraging, but still, you don't want to take that chance. I wouldn't take the chance, and I don't think the police should either. So
to use that common slur, probably some ISIS incel sitting at home putting together a meme, and he's like, "Do it!" And he's raging when his post only gets like 10 impressions and liked by his radicalized mother.
So one definitely to keep an eye on. And actually, before we move off the topic, I do think it's notable that you see these bollards that were only set up in the last couple of years at the end of Grafton Street, and they're kind of, it looks all decorative and nice, and I'm sure if you ask the city council officially why are they there, they'd say, oh, it's just to beautify the city. It's, I don't know, people who have been to Dublin in the last few years will know what I'm talking about, but if you don't know, there's these square flower pots, I suppose you'd call them, that have kind of bushes in them, but they're massive and they're big and heavy, and they're evenly spaced along the end of this very prominent street in Dublin. And so the official reason for it being there is it's just a nice feature, but they just so happen to go up in that period of time a couple of years ago when all of these vehicular jihadist attacks started happening en masse in Europe. So it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to deduce what's going on there, in my opinion.
I know you're standing there watching them get installed, and they're sort of moving them based on whether the Dublin City Council employee can fit a van down between them. And he's like, they find that he can't. They're like, right, that'll do. But it's I wanted to bring up something else on a completely unrelated note. Did you see the video of Selena Gomez doing the rounds?
Is this the one where she's bawling her eyes out, crying about Trump's deportation policy?
Less people think I'm bringing up Selena Gomez because I'm a big fan. We do like to discuss cultural happenings, and I think no one could deny that she, at least for our fairly youthful generation, I was obviously never a big fan or anything like this, but she would have been around. She would have been, I don't know what was it, Disney Channel or Nickelodeon? I can't remember which one. Disney, I guess. And there's a video going around of her sobbing into the camera, apologizing to the people that Trump has deported so far because she can't do anything about it, and saying she wishes she could be there with them. As someone commented, she could be if she just chooses to, leave on one of these planes. She offers herself up for deportation, but I don't think her virtue, her empathy, I suppose, extends that far. But I wanted to discuss this not because, again, of the developments in America, because I think there's plenty of discussion of that going along. But I was struck by the way the people make fun of the, celebrity overreactions all the time. But I was struck by the fact that it seems like ridicule is the only reaction to celebrity interventions these days. And that feels markedly different to 10 years ago in 2014, 2015, when, I don't know, celebrity collaborations and celebrities speaking out on things was kind of seen as cool. I was reminded of this the other day when I came across, I don't know if you remember that Oscars picture where they fit in a bunch of actors like Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep, Ellen DeGeneres, I think was in there as well. There was a bunch of them, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, this picture's going to break the internet." Whereas I feel like if that came up these days, not only would people not care, they would be ridiculing it. They'd probably be, I don't know, referring to them as a bunch of corrupt elites, all sorts of things. Whereas, again, 10 years ago, this was cool. This was something novel. I feel like the celebrity culture is waning big time.
You know what's ruined celebrities is social media. It's completely destroyed our mystique that we had around these people because, before the advent of social media and the internet, you would only see celebrities at their very best for the most part. Of course, the paparazzi was a thing and, you would get sometimes glimpses behind the scenes. But for the most part, it would be glowing interviews with Vanity Fair where they only present the best stories about the good things they're doing and that charitable cause that I set up a foundation for whatever. And, that you see them on screen where they're all done up to the nines with makeup, including the men. So their skin is perfect and they're perfect. And, they're on the red carpet and they have a beautiful spouse and all this kind of thing. And they just look like superheroes or demigods, effectively. And then social media gave us more access to them, where we realized you guys are not only the same as me, in many ways you are actually significantly worse. And it just becomes totally, we have a total degradation of our opinion of them as people. Not that by the way, I don't think you or I or many of our viewers would have ever felt that way about the cult of celebrity. There's very few people who I would have been infatuated with as some kind of hero just because they're famous.
Ryan Tuberty was your sole obsession.
Yeah, absolutely. It was heartbreaking when I realized that he's not the deity like Adonis that I thought he was. But I've spent some time in therapy and I've managed to get over that in time. But no, like honestly though, you do just realize these people have stupid opinions. Their marriages often don't work, which I'm not saying if your marriage doesn't work, you're a bad person. Obviously, don't misunderstand me. All I'm saying is they're not perfect. They have many, many personal flaws and foibles. Yeah. And they're just some jackass who gets up and takes a shit and, they're just like anybody else. And so that's really made them, I think we take them a lot less seriously than we used to, which is a good thing.
I think your point about social media is exactly it, which is that there was this gap between, for want of a better way of putting it, the elites and the rest of us. And all the only communications you would get were publications out of Hollywood, pictures of them on movie sets. As you say, the paparazzi were always a thing, but they were always kind of seen as seedy. Whereas social media has ensured that everyone's worst is seen all the time, like especially if you're living in the public eyes, a lot of these people are, and it has demystified them, it has taken away their mystique. And as you say, particularly as I feel like living standards grow more difficult for people in terms of the cost of living, in terms of a lot of policy decisions, I suppose, making themselves felt, the disconnect between the opinions celebrities have come to hold because of their privilege, for want of a better way of putting it, and their wealth and things like this, is at complete odds with the living standards that most people enjoy. And so people, I think, have finally come to the point where it's like, well, why the hell would we listen to these people who have absolutely nothing to say to me? And not only are they being discarded, but they're being actively ridiculed. And I just think it's incredibly interesting that this cult of the celebrity, I think it is something to observe, because as I say, it was a real thing 10 years ago and it is no longer. And not only no longer, but they're actively sort of disgraced on social media. I think as well that the point that I wanted to make on this was just that, I feel like virality is more so a thing that people put stock in these days, which is why you've got, I don't know, commentators and people in all of these. It's a more intellectual direction, I suppose, than actors and musicians and things like this. that are becoming more prominent and becoming the ones that people talk about and things like this. Maybe it's also because their words are able to reach further, whereas celebrities used to just be pictures or whatever. But I do think there's an interesting vibe shift underway, and this is just another manifestation of it. It's not to say that celebrities have no influence. Of course, they're making music that, like, in some instances, billions of people are listening to, movies that millions of people are watching. But I think when they step outside of that and they decide to spout their stupid opinions, people are just writing that off.
Do you think as well, and this just occurred to me while we're having this conversation, do you think as well there's a bit of fame inflation going on, by which I mean the internet has made it possible that almost anyone can become famous for anything. And so the one thing that they had, which is, oh wow, lots of people know your name. I could run up O'Connell Street in a leotard screaming nonsense, and I would go viral on social media, and I would then be one of these famous people. You know, like, that's all it takes now. The amount of morons who have nothing to contribute of worth to society who are famous makes you realize how thin the attention economy really is and how little it means as to someone's actual value in life, you know.
I think in continuing your run of poor examples, O'Connell Street is a bad choice because no one would bat an eyelid at some fella running up the street in a leotard there.
I did see a guy once relatively recently, like in the last year, I saw a guy on O'Connell Street fully naked doing push-ups, and like his penis was touching the ground every time he went down, and he was just there doing it very nonchalantly. Like, it didn't look like he was looking for attention. He looked like he does this all the time, and like we were weird for noticing that kind of way. So maybe
maybe you look over at him and he's like, "Why are you looking?"
Exactly. You guys are a bunch of weirdos. I'm getting out of here. It reminds me, as far as like the insipid nature of celebrity. Do you remember that quote where Bono, before the election just last year, he said that if Trump won, he would drive his car off a cliff? And I saw lots of people reacting saying, this is why I voted for Trump. That he probably won the election for him just based on that alone.
It is, and all these bold prediction people are going to move, and it's like, oh yeah, like go, that wins that secures my vote. I mean, obviously not putting you into the celebrity category or anything, but I also think that, as you say, well, it's come to the state. I know from chatting with you offline that, you leave the house and you get recognized a couple of times a day through your work with Gript, because you are certainly the most public face we have. And I think it is also, as you're saying, that you kind of see that, it isn't everything that it's cracked up to be. I mean, literally leaving, it's literally just like you're going about your business, and, it's just more interactions a day. I'm sure it's nice, but like, it's not the sort of thing to be longed after in the same way that people always spoke about fame as being the target and the goal of life.
Yeah, like really the only difference it makes for my life, and as you say, I wouldn't say I'm like famous or a celebrity, but I would get recognized like a decent bit in my day-to-day life. And the only difference it means is that I can't go down to the local shop looking scruffy, or there's certain things I can't do anymore. Like I have to eat clean, because I always think if I'm walking up the street eating a bag of Haribo and somebody sees me, that's just embarrassing, because they're going to be like, isn't that your man who argues with politicians for a living? So then
you've had to cut out the naked push-ups on O'Connell Street.
Exactly. Yeah, my strength has declined significantly because I don't have any more naked push-up time. So yeah, devastating. That might be a good podcast title for this episode: naked push-ups on O'Connell Street. I know. We'll have to see. With that, will we move on to the viewer questions?
But Ben, how many push-ups can you do naked on O'Connell Street?
I like the idea that there is a difference, like the weight of the clothes changes. I can maybe squeeze in an extra 2, depending.
Extra half a push-up.
Yeah, exactly. I was just trying to be more aerodynamic. But, so as far as viewer questions goes, every week we're going to be reading out viewer questions. We got a whole load of really good ones. If we didn't read your question, don't be discouraged, because we might read it out again, because we got so many good ones that we're only taking 2 per week for the time being, and there's too many to get to all of them. But we do want to get to some of them, because we really appreciate everybody's engagement with such things. So if you want to ask a question, you just go to gript.ie/questions. And there's a portal. You have to be a Gript subscriber to ask it, but it will be added to the pool, and we will try to get to as many people as possible, because we really appreciate it. And then also, before I read out this one here, I might just add as an addition, you don't just have to ask political questions. You could ask about what it's like to work for Gript, or culture, or relationships. Like Jason and I were both guys in our late 20s who are married in Northern Ireland with kids. That's a perspective that you might be interested in. Religion, we're both Catholic guys, that sort of thing. I'm not saying you have to ask about those topics, but I'm just saying you can. It doesn't all have to be government and politics and elections. It can be really whatever you guys are interested in.
We should preface, of course, that we don't claim to be experts in absolutely anything, but we're happy to, we would like some community engagement when it comes to the questions and things. So yeah, more than happy to discuss whatever you would hope to ask.
Absolutely. Will you take the first question or will I? What do you think?
Yeah, I can take the first one to swap it around from last week if you like. So Stephen writes in, "Hey lads, enjoying the podcast." Thank you, Stephen. Best of luck with it. His question is, how should the Irish government respond if Trump lowers the US corporate tax rate to 15%? Should Ireland pull out of the international corporate tax agreement and then just lower ours back to 12.5%? This is a complicated question, and it's obviously based on a lot of variables. I don't claim to have a silver bullet for this. I'm personally not too fond of sort of the proposed solution there of pulling out of international corporate tax agreements and lowering ours back to 12.5%. I mean, I think you could do that, but I think if you were seen to be doing that, people would know it for what it was, and then they just tried to figure out something else, I suppose, in order to get back there. But the US in particular, say in this instance, would attempt to, impose some other sort of sanction. Because the difficulty in our relationship with the US is that we're entirely dependent upon them. They aren't dependent. Not entirely. I should clarify that. We're not entirely dependent upon them. But in terms of the relationship, it is somewhat one way. It's like, yes, they get a base in the EU. Yes, they benefit from a skilled workforce and things, but those are less and less unique selling points from the Irish perspective, at least as far as I'm concerned or can see. I think, sort of similarly to the answer you were floating before this, the best solution to potential threats like this is plowing the money that we have now into the sovereign fund. I wrote yesterday that I do think that the establishment of these sovereign wealth funds for Ireland was one of the best sort of pieces of financial foresight or foresight in general that we've had in a long time, because we are currently, as we started the podcast with, technically rolling in it, even if a lot of us aren't feeling that. And that money should be put into funds so that, we have options going forward should hardship befall us. I think you were going to get into another solution that I definitely would agree in, which is sort of investment in native industry and things. You could probably take that away.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the problem with what I'm about to say is that it's the kind of thing, sort of like what we were saying with the storm, that should have been done years ago, as opposed to now when we're on the precipice of a disaster, because you can't really do what I'm about to say in a very short period of time. So that is a slight hole in my analysis, but I feel like the fact that having American foreign multinationals pull out is going to be such a death blow for us is a situation we never should have gotten into in the first place, because if we had native industries of our own in addition to those, then we could at least keep things going to a certain extent. But what native industry does Ireland have now? We used to have sugar. The sugar beet industry was a big thing. That's gone now due to EU regulations and policies. We used to have turf and peat. As we know, that's all gone out the window thanks to Eamon Ryan and his co-religionists. We have tourism. That's a big source, but that's largely been bollocked by immigration and COVID. Half the hotels in the country now are iPass centers. So that's taken a huge hit. And then that has all kinds of downstream effects on restaurants and other things that tourists usually engage with. So that's not great. Agriculture hammered by climate policies, as we know. Fishing hammered by EU quotas. So we've done very little to cultivate a homegrown native industry that we can use to stand on our own 2 feet, even if all of these different companies were to pull out, that we would at least have something that we would be left with. We have almost nothing. And even something as simple as having a native film industry. Like, I've thought about this for a long time, that there are so many Irish myths that would be of huge interest to the diaspora, Irish Americans and people in Australia, and even people who aren't of any kind of Irish extraction, but who would just think it was cool to watch a movie about Cú Chulainn. Like, you could have a whole Irish cinematic universe if we had the wherewithal to do such a thing. And that would be, we could almost be like a little mini Hollywood within Europe. But we don't think of these things. We just rely on the corporate tax receipts that we receive from all of these foreign entities, and then the minute something like this happens, they pull out, and then we're left just grasping at straws because we didn't plan in advance. So it's not exactly an answer to the question, because the question was, what should we do? And I said, here's what we should have done. But
I think the honest answer is that, like, in a sort of war with the US like this, there's not a whole lot we can do. We are the significantly smaller sparring partner when it comes to this.
Yeah,
so
it's like what do you do if a tank is on your front lawn and it's shooting at you and it's trying to kill you? You throw yourself into the air and you scatter your guts over a wide area. That's usually what most people are doing. That's like, what can you do? You know.
I do think, though, that probably the best answer is to do what we should have done a decade ago. It's like better late than never, and invest in all those things that, even if hard times were to fall upon us, we would maintain a basic sort of standard, like investment in infrastructure. It's like, we're talking about a metro for bloody 30 years now or so. Housing, like, obviously, I appreciate that getting housing sorted. It's not an easy thing. It's not waving a magic wand and you get more of it. Like, there's not enough workers in construction, say, to ramp it up to the degree that we need. But focus, again, I thought the Sovereign Wealth Fund is a good example. Focus on the future. Focus on those things that are sustainable and that can last over. Just continuing to milk the corporate tax cash cow, because I think we should take what we can get from it while we can, but that can't be our sole focus.
And also, there's this, rumored and suspected oil deposits off the coast of the country, and gas and all of these fossil fuels. And we've banned exploration licenses, where we say, no, nobody can look for that. Leave it in. If it is there, just leave it in the ground. And that will be a huge source of income that countries like Norway have benefited from massively if such a thing was to be discovered. And we're just leaving it there, the possibility of it, because of climate nonsense. Whereas that's the kind of thing that I believe we should be looking at very strongly to shore up and make ourselves as independent economically as we possibly can in the face of disaster.
I mean, it is, as you say, it's like, whatever with our climate concerns, Trump said coming back in, it's time to drill, baby, drill. So, like, what's the addition of our little drilling efforts going to make to the overall picture? I mean, I agree that I said in a piece yesterday, and it was probably somewhat unpopular, that I think our moral instinct or our desire to do the right thing is good. I just think we're grievously misinformed a lot of the time about what the good is. And I also think that when it comes to being in government, it's also not your job to be, I mean, obviously you should be, we would say, striving for sainthood anyway, but you also have the responsibility of governing the country. That kind of has to take precedence when you're a minister, not, enacting your personal moral whim. So I do think that that's something to be considered. But how about we move on to the next one?
Yeah, so Kieran says, given the natural instability of this government propped up by independents, and looking at the challenges ahead, Donald Trump, Irish presidential election, housing, healthcare, etc., do you think this government will even last 100 days? I do, personally. Notwithstanding all the challenges you have listed, which are not insubstantial. But I think that this government, the perception I have from talking to people within the government who have gotten over the hump of the 2024 election, is they were bracing for a punch that never came. They knew that the public has been extremely upset for years. I mean, think about everything that happened over the last term of government with COVID, which drove a lot of people ballistic due to the length of the lockdowns and so on. And then we had years of a migration crisis and protests up and down the country, and towns and villages, cost of living. There was just so much. The referendum, that was the same year. They got crushed in a referendum. So there were all these things mounting up. And they were wincing, thinking, oh, this is going to be a disaster. We're going to get absolutely creamed here. And then for one reason or another, we can get into why that is another time. But regardless of the reason, it didn't come, and they were spared, and they actually did all right in the election. I believe they will cling to that result for as long as humanly possible. They're now safe for another 5 years, and they can breathe a sigh of relief, and they do not want to risk going to the people again, because the first time they were so delighted to get away with it effectively, and they're not going to want to walk immediately into a buzzsaw if things suddenly go wrong. So I seriously doubt there'll be another election within 100 days, regardless of what happens, just from a self-preservation perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I agree with Kieran's instinct that there's a degree of choppiness in this government that wasn't there in the last one, because there was sort of significantly more, whether it was ideological alignment or just sort of personality alignment or what, there was more sort of coherence to the last one. Whereas, as we saw with the creche-like scenes in the Dáil last week, there may well be a challenge ahead in terms of even getting Dáil business to proceed as it needs to, because if it's
by the way, I agree with the opposition of what they did. If I had been a TD, I'd be in the backbench just screaming, not anything in particular, just to add to the volume, because I think
I'm very angry.
No, not even less articulate than that. Just in the back while everyone's talking, just so that I can enhance the disruption, because I think they were dead right. Sorry, go on.
No, that was yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have lowered the tone of the debate anyway. But I do think that there is a degree of sort of choppiness there that I could realistically see people who've been in the negotiations to form the government dropping out, whether it's over the course of the next 100 days or longer. I don't know. I agree with the idea that there's more unpredictability in terms of the characters that make this one up. That said, I don't see the government collapsing. Unless it comes out of blindside. And as I say, they sort of have difficulty in terms of getting the Dáil to proceed, because the opposition disagree with the way in which speaking rights are being doled out and things like this. I think there could be potential for ructions there, but I have a hard time seeing government not lasting beyond 100 days, because as we were saying earlier, it's a lot of the same characters. It's Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael in the driving seat once again, Sinn Féin and the various leftist parties, or leftist parties of various flavors, I should say, in opposition. So it's by and large the same setup. It's just a question of whether the position of the independents proves a sticking point, and I don't think it will. Obviously, we may well end up with egg on our face here based on that prediction, but that isn't withstanding that I think it's going to be a very challenging 5 years with all of those challenges he's outlined. But boy, are Irish governments good at circling the wagons when the going gets difficult. And I think we'll probably, somehow, if all the multinationals pull out and government policy is shown to have been very short-sighted, it will be the electorate's fault as far as the government's concerned. You stupid people who didn't push us hard enough.
It's going to be super high stakes, because whenever the next election is, be it this year or 5 years from now, I feel like it's going to be a very stark choice between a decidedly left-wing government and a decidedly right-wing government, is my instinct. I think you're going to be dealing with people who think like us, for lack of a better word, on one side, and you're going to have kind of a Sinn Féin, Soc Dems, Labour type option on the other side. And people are going to have to make their mind up at that fork in the road which way they go. So it'll be a high-stakes decision either way.
No, I agree. But that said, I haven't dusted off my crystal ball yet, so I do find it very difficult to see how it's going to go. But I think they'll last 100 days at least. How successfully those 100 days will go, I'm not optimistic.
Well, with that said, we will leave our beautiful viewers for another week. As I said earlier, if you want to purchase any kind of Gript mug, t-shirt, or similar merchandise, you can go to gript.ie/merch. And if you would like to leave a question that we can answer next week on whatever topic suits your fancy, you can go to gript.ie/questions, and we would be delighted to hear from you. Thank you so much again for listening, and we will see you next week. God bless.
God bless.